The Protestant Reformation 191. Three streams contributed to the religious upheaval in 16th century Europe. First, among common people or the laboring poor, who might find their spokesman among local priests, there was an endemic dissatisfaction with all the grand apparatus of the church, or a belief that its bishops and abbots were part of a wealthy and oppressive ruling class. For such people, religious ideas became mixed with a protest against the whole social order. They found expression in the Great Peasant Rebellion in Germany in the 1520s. The sects that emerged from these social groups are known historically as Anabaptists, and the modern Baptists, Mennonites, and Moravian Brothers are among their descendants. Second, and forming a group generally more educated and with broader views of the world, were the middle classes of various European cities, especially of cities that were almost autonomous little republics, as in Germany, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. They might wish to manage their own religious affairs as they did their other business, believing that the church hierarchy was too much embedded in a feudal, baronial, and monarchical system with which they had little in common. The modern churches of Calvinist origin came in large part from this stream. Third, there were the ruling sovereigns and princes, who had long disputed with the church on matters of property, taxes, legal jurisdiction, and political influence. All such rulers wanted to be masters in their own territory. In the end, it was the power of such 82 political and social discontents, 192 rulers, that determined which form of religion should officially prevail. The Lutheran and Anglican churches were in this tradition, and to some extent the Gallican Church, as the French branch of the Roman Catholic Church was called. As it turned out, by 1600, the second and third streams had won many successes, but the first was suppressed. Socio-religious radicalism was reduced to an undercurrent in countries where Anglican, Lutheran, Calvinist, or Roman Catholic churches were established during the 16th century. This painting, entitled Confession of Jewish Judas by the Spanish artists Martin Bernat and Miguel Ximenez, c. 1480s, suggests the dangers that non-Christian people faced in late 15th century Spain. Influential, wealthy interrogators questioned the beliefs or behavior of persons whose religion made them suspicious and vulnerable to the powerful people who distrusted them. 1903 Europe, 1526. The main feature of the political map of Europe about 1526 is the predominance of the House of Habsburg. Much of Europe was ruled by the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, who was at the same time King Charles I of Spain. Charles left his possessions in Austria, Hungary, and Bohemia to his brother, and those in Spain, the Netherlands, Italy, and America to his son, thereby establishing the Austrian and Spanish branches of the Habsburg dynasty. France was nearly encircled by Habsburg dominions and habitually formed alliances to oppose the Habsburg kings. Strands of Protestantism. Since Northern Europe became Protestant while the South remained Catholic, it may look as if the North had broken off in a body from a once solid Roman Church. The reality, 83-194, was not so simple. Let us for a moment put aside the Protestant and think of the adherents of the new religion as religious revolutionaries. Their ideas were revolutionary because they held not merely that abuses in the church must be corrected, but also that the Roman Church itself was wrong in principle. Even so, there were many who hoped, for years, that old and new ideas of the church might be combined. Many deplored the extremes, but gradually in the heat of struggle had to choose one side or the other. The issues became drawn, and each side aspired to destroy its adversary. For over a century, the revolutionaries maintained the hope that popery would everywhere fall. For over a century, the upholders of the old order worked to annihilate or reconvert heretics. Only slowly did Catholics and Protestants come to accept each other's existence as an established fact of European society. Though the religious frontier that was to prove permanent appeared as early as 1560, it was not generally accepted until after the 30 Years' War, which ended in 1648. 995 Luther and Lutheranism. The first who successfully defied the older church authorities was Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546. He was a monk, and an earnest one, until he was almost 40 years old. A vehement and spiritually uneasy man, with many dark and introspective recesses in his personality, Luther was terrified by the thought of the omnipotence of God, distressed by his own sense of inadequacy, apprehensive of the devil, and suffering from the chronic conviction that he was damned. The means offered by the church to allay such spiritual anguish, the sacraments, prayer, attendance at Mass, gave him no satisfaction. From a reading and pondering of St. Paul, Romans 1:17, the just shall live by faith, there dawned upon him a new realization and sense of peace. He developed the doctrine of justification by faith alone. This held that what justifies a person is not what the church knew as works, prayer, alms, the sacraments, holy living, but faith alone, an inward bent of spirit given to each soul directly by God. Good works, Luther thought, were the consequence and external evidence of this inner grace, but in no way its cause. People did not earn grace by doing good. They did the good because they possessed the grace of God. With this idea, Luther for some years lived content. Even years later, some high-placed churchmen believed that in Luther's doctrine of justification by faith, there was nothing contrary to the teachings of the Catholic Church. Luther's justification by faith. Luther, now a professor at Wittenberg, was brought out of seclusion by an incident of 1517. A friar named Tetzel was traveling through Germany distributing indulgences, authorized by the Pope to finance the building of St. Peter's in Rome. Tetzel claimed that purchasing indulgences would free people from some of the punishments of purgatory, so the faithful were paying stipulated sums of money to buy them. Luther thought that people were being deluded, that no one could obtain grace in this way or ease the pains of relatives in purgatory, as was officially claimed. In the usual academic manner of the day, he posted 95 theses on the door of the castle church at Wittenberg. Reviewing the Catholic sacrament of penance, Luther held in these theses that, after confession, the sinner is freed of sinful burdens not by the priest's absolution, but by inner grace and faith alone. Increasingly, as Luther described his view of Christian faith, it seemed that the priesthood performed no necessary function in the spiritual relation between human beings and God. Indulgences 84, 196. Martin Luther and his wife, Catherine von Bora, portrayed here by the artist Lucas Cranach the Elder, represent the acceptance of marriage among the clergy and religious leaders of the new Protestant churches. Catherine had lived in a convent before she married Luther and took on the new tasks of a religious wife in a Protestant minister's household. Source: Statens Museum for Kunst, National Gallery of Denmark, Olstein Bild, Getty Images. Luther at first appealed to the Pope, Leo X, to correct the abuse of indulgences in Germany. When the Pope refused action, Luther, like many before him, urged the assembly of a general church council as a religious authority above the Pope. He was obliged, however, to admit in public debate that even the decision of a general council might be mistaken. The Council of Constance, he said, had in fact erred in its condemnation of John Hus. But if neither the Pope nor yet a council had authority to define true Christian belief, where was such authority to be found? Luther's answer was, in effect, there is no such authority. He held that individuals might read the Bible and freely make their own interpretations according to their own conscience. This idea was as revolutionary for the Church as would be the assertion today that neither the Supreme Court nor any other body may authoritatively interpret or enforce the Constitution of the United States, since each citizen may interpret the Constitution in his or her own way. From his first public appearance, Luther's critique of the Roman Church won ardent supporters, for there was a good deal of resentment in Germany against Rome. In 1519 and 1520, he rallied public opinion in a series of tracts that profoundly challenged key tenets of the Roman Catholic Church. He especially urged people to find Christian truth in the Bible for themselves, and in the Bible only. He denounced the reliance on fasts, pilgrimages, saints, and masses. He rejected the belief in purgatory. He reduced the 7 sacraments to 2, baptism and the communion, as he called the Mass. In the latter, he repudiated the doctrine of transubstantiation, which held that the priest's consecration of bread and wine during the Mass transformed these substances into the actual body and blood of Christ. At the same time, however, he affirmed that God was still somehow, mysteriously 85-197 present in the bread and wine. He declared that the clergy should marry, upbraided the prelates for their luxury, and demanded that monasticism be eliminated. To drive through such reforms, he called upon the temporal power, the princes of Germany. He thus issued an invitation to the state to assume control over religion, an invitation which, in the days of the new monarchy, a good many rulers were enthusiastically willing to accept. Luther's criticisms of the Church, 198, threatened by a papal bull with excommunication unless he recanted, Luther solemnly and publicly burned the bull. Excommunication followed. To the Emperor Charles V now fell the duty of apprehending the heretic and repressing the heresy. Luther was summoned to appear before an assembly of the governing officials of the Holy Roman Empire, called a Diet, which met at Worms, an imperial city in the Rhineland. He declared that he could be convinced only by scripture or right reason. Otherwise, I neither can nor will recant anything, since it is neither right nor safe to act against conscience. God help me, amen. He was placed under the ban of the empire, but the Elector of Saxony and other North German princes took Luther under their protection after he left Worms. In safe seclusion, he began to translate the Bible into German. Lutheranism quickly swept over Germany, assuming the proportions of a national upheaval. It became mixed with all kinds of political and social revolution. A league of imperial knights adopting Lutheranism attacked their neighbors, the church states of the Rhineland, hoping by annexations to enlarge their own meager territories. In 1524, the peasants of a large part of Germany revolted. They were stirred by new religious ideas, worked upon by preachers who went beyond Luther in asserting that each individual could readily understand what was right or wrong. Their aims, however, were social and economic. They demanded a regulation of rents and security of common village rights, and complained of oppressive rule by their manorial overlords. Luther repudiated all connection with the peasants, called them filthy swine, and urged the princes to suppress them by the sword. The peasants were unmercifully put down, but popular unrest continued to stir the country, expressing itself in a religious age in various forms of extreme religious frenzy. Social revolution. Various religious leaders attracted devout followers, who came to be known collectively as Anabaptists. Some said that all the world needed was love, some that Christ would soon come again, some that they were saints and could do no wrong, and some that infant baptism was useless, immersion of full-grown adults being required as described in the Bible. The roads of Germany were alive with religious radicals, of whom some 10,000 converged in 1534 on the city of Munster. There they proclaimed the reign of the saints, abolished property, and introduced polygamy as sanctioned in the Old Testament. A Dutch tailor, John of Leyden, claimed that authority came to him directly from God. Hemmed in by besieging armies, he ruled Munster by a revolutionary terror. Luther advised his followers to join even with Catholics to repress such a dangerous religious and social menace. After a full year, Munster fell to the forces of its former rulers. The saints were pitilessly rooted out. John of Leyden died in torture. Luther, horrified at the way in which religious revolution became confused with social revolution, defined his own position more conservatively. He restricted, while never denying, the right of private judgment in matters of conscience, and he made a larger place for an established Lutheran clergy who served as teachers and religious leaders over the laity. Always well disposed to temporal rulers, having called upon the princes to act as religious reformers, he was thrown by the peasant and Anabaptist uprisings into an even closer alliance with the state. Christian liberty, Luther insisted, was an internal freedom, purely spiritual, known only to God. In worldly matters, he said, the good Christian owed obedience to established authority. Lutheranism, thus 1909, came to view the state with more deference and respect than governments usually received from either Roman Catholicism or the Calvinism that soon arose. Luther's reaction 86. The radical Anabaptist movement in Munster was severely repressed after the city's former rulers regained control in early 1536. This illustration depicts the public torture and death of John of Leyden, whose punishment served as a vivid warning to other revolutionary Protestants throughout Germany. Falkenstein photo, Alamy stock photo. In the revolution that was rocking Germany, it was not the uprising of imperial knights, nor that of peasants or tailors and journeymen, that was successful, but the rebellion of the higher orders of the empire against the emperor. Charles V, as Holy Roman Emperor, was bound to uphold Catholicism, because only in a Catholic world did the Holy Empire have 200 any meaning. The states of the empire, always fearing the loss of local liberty, saw in Charles's efforts to repress Luther a threat to their own freedom. Many imperial free cities and most of the dynastic states of North Germany now insisted on adding to their other rights and liberties the right, or liberty, to determine their own religion. The right or power to reform, they said, belonged to member states, not to the empire itself. They became Lutheran locally, introducing Lutheran bishops, doctrines, and forms of worship. Where a state turned Lutheran, it usually confiscated the church properties within its borders, a process that considerably enriched some of the Lutheran princes and gave them a strong material interest in the success of the Lutheran movement. In most of the church states, since the Catholic archbishop or bishop was himself the government, Catholicism prevailed, but a few church states turned Lutheran. A good example of the secularization of a church state was afforded in East Prussia, just outside the empire. This territory belonged to the Teutonic Order, a Catholic organization of which the Grand Commander and elective official was at this time Albert of Brandenburg. In 1525, Albert declared for Luther and converted East Prussia into a secular duchy, of which he and his descendants became hereditary dukes. Political Rebellion 87 Chronology of Notable Events 1309 to 1555, 1309 to 1378 Babylonian Captivity, Papacy in Avignon 1337 to 1453, 100 years. War between England and France 1348-1350. Black Death decimates European population c. 1350 to 1500. Renaissance, Humanism and Art 2013-78 to 4017. Schism of Roman Catholic Church. Popes in Avignon and Rome 1454. Johann Gutenberg begins printing books with movable type. 1494 French invasion of Italy destroys independence of city-states. 1513 Niccolò Machiavelli writes The Prince. 1517 Martin Luther posts his 95 Theses, beginning of Protestant Reformation. 1545 to 1563 Roman Catholic Council meets at Trent, promotes Catholic reforms. 1555 Peace of Augsburg recognizes Protestant and Catholic states in Germany. Against the emperor, a group of Lutheran princes and free cities formed the League of Schmalkald. The King of France, Francis I, though a Catholic in good standing, allied with and supported the League. Political interests overrode religious ones. Against the universal monarchy of the swollen Habsburgs, the French found alliances where they could, allying with the Turks as with the Lutherans, building up a balance of power against their mighty foe. It became the studied policy of Catholic France to maintain the religious division of Germany. Threatened by French and Turkish armies and challenged by the resistance of German princes within his own empire, Charles appealed to the Pope, urging him to assemble a Europe-wide council in which all disputed matters could be considered. The Protestants could be heard, compromises could be effected, and church unity and German unity, such as it was, could be restored. The King of France schemed at Rome to prevent the Pope from calling any such council. The kings of both France and England urged national councils instead, in which religious questions could be settled on a national basis. Pope after pope delayed. The papacy feared that a council of all Latin Christendom might get out of control, since Catholics as much as Protestants demanded reform. To the papacy, remembering the Council of Constance, nothing was more upsetting than the thought of a council, not even the Protestants, not even 22 the Turks. So the popes procrastinated, no council met, years passed, and a new generation grew up in Lutheranism. Meanwhile, the Schmalkaldic League, allied with France, actually went to war with the emperor in 1546. Germany fell into an anarchy of civil struggle between Catholic and Protestant states, the latter aided by Catholic France. The war was ended by the Peace of Augsburg of 1555. Charles's appeals to the papacy 88 move away, leaving his land and its inhabitants Catholic. Since the issues in Germany were still far from stabilized, this proviso was often disregarded in later years. The Peace of Augsburg 23. The terms set at Augsburg signified a complete victory for the cause of Lutheranism and states' rights. Each state of the empire received the liberty to be either Lutheran or Catholic as it chose. No individual freedom of religion was permitted. If a ruler or a free city decided for Lutheranism, then all persons had to be Lutheran. Similarly, in Catholic states, all had to be Catholic. The Peace of Augsburg provided also, by the so-called ecclesiastical reservation, that any Catholic bishop or other churchman who turned Lutheran in the future should not carry his territory with him, but should turn Lutheran as an individual and slice. The Peace of Augsburg was thus in religion a great victory for Protestantism, and at the same time, in German politics and constitutional matters, a step in the disintegration of Germany into a mosaic of increasingly separate states. Lutheranism prevailed in the north and in the south, in the Duchy of Württemberg, and various detached islands formed by Lutheranized free cities. Catholicism mostly prevailed in the south, in the Rhine Valley, and in the direct possessions of the House of Habsburg, which in 1555 reached as far north as the Netherlands. The Germans, because of conditions in the Holy Roman Empire, were the one large European people to emerge from the religious conflict, almost evenly divided between Catholic and Protestant. Lutheranism was also adopted by the kings of Denmark and Sweden as early as the 1520s. Since Denmark controlled Norway and Sweden ruled Finland and the eastern Baltic, all Scandinavia and the Baltic regions became, like North Germany, Lutheran. Beyond this area, Lutheranism failed to take root. Like Anglicanism in England, to be described shortly, Lutheranism was too closely associated with established states to spread easily as an international movement. Another group of religious revolutionaries, the followers of John Calvin, thus became the most successful international form of the Protestant movement. Within German territories, however, neither Lutherans nor Catholics were willing to tolerate the Calvinists, and the Peace of Augsburg granted no political or religious rights to Calvinism.